It wasn't rage that brought me to the Hilton. It was the envelope in my coat pocket, creased, yellowed, and still full of everything they chose to forget. The air inside the lobby was over-perfumed, over-polished. There was that muted hum of luxury, the clink of ice in glasses, the soft jazz from somewhere invisible, and the manufactured warmth of staff smiles. I stepped onto the marble like it hadn't been 10 years since anyone in this town had said my name without lowering their voice. My heels didn't echo. I'd learned how to walk silently a long time ago. I passed a line of balloons in navy and gold tied to a display that read, "Celebrating a Legacy Principal, Harold Blake's Retirement Gala." I wondered who'd picked that font, modern but serious, commanding but soft. The kind of font that made people trust a lie. The envelope shifted against my ribs as I moved through the crowd. I kept my coat on even though the heat of bodies and celebration pressed in from all sides. I didn't want to show my dress yet. Didn't want to show my face just yet either. A server passed me with a tray of champagne. I took one not for the drink, but to look like I belonged. The glass was cold, but the envelope was colder. Somewhere near the ballroom, I caught a burst of applause and a man's voice through a microphone. "We are gathered here tonight not only to celebrate a career, but to honor a man whose dedication shaped generations." They meant Harold Blake. They meant the man who'd shut his door when I was 18, who'd looked at me like I was someone else's daughter when I begged him to believe me. The man who'd told me that what I had wasn't talent, just noise, that I was never serious, that I was selfish to want out, that I'd never make it. And yet here I was, a woman who'd done just that. Made it. Made something. But not because of him. The envelope in my pocket dug deeper when I turned toward the ballroom entrance. 10 years old and still intact, more intact than my family, that's for sure. I hadn't opened it since the day I found it buried in a drawer of my aunt's attic, left behind in a folder labeled unfiled. It still bore the crest of the Juilliard admissions office and the postmark from 2013. They'd never told me it arrived. They'd let me believe I'd been rejected. I felt the weight of those missing years every time I touched the seal. Every missed show. Every unpaid internship. Every night I'd scrape together rent while someone else gave standing ovations to the version of me that might have been. Someone brushed past me, murmuring, "Sorry," and I looked up in time to see a familiar profile disappear into the reception hall. One of his old colleagues. Mrs. Trent, if memory served, former chemistry teacher and loudest mourner at PTA meetings. Her hair was still severe, still dyed too dark for her age. No one noticed me. Not yet. That was good. It gave me time to look. Framed photos lined the hallway wall outside the ballroom. Harold shaking hands, Harold cutting ribbons, Harold with honor roll students he likely didn't remember by name. There were no pictures of me, of course. The class of 2013 had been scrubbed clean of my name the same year I left. No yearbook quotes, no senior show credits, no scholarship announcements, no trace. I kept walking. Every step closer brought a flicker of something underneath the steel I'd built. Not nerves. Something colder. Something that looked like morning but wasn't. This hotel had hosted fundraisers for the district for years. I remembered that much. I remembered sneaking into the kitchen once to avoid him after a performance. I remembered the click of his voice behind closed doors, always praising other daughters, other children. I remembered standing outside his office, envelope in hand, before I even knew it existed. The last time I stood in front of a door like this, it didn't open for me. He'd locked it. Tonight, it would open. I ran my fingers along the seam of the envelope. I didn't care who was inside anymore. I didn't care if Harold cried, if he yelled, if he called for security. I wasn't 18, and I wasn't his problem to hide. I was what he made invisible. A woman in a black gown turned to glance at me, her expression a polite question. I looked away. Not yet. No need to speak to strangers until the right ears were in the room. The grand double doors to the ballroom loomed ahead, wood-paneled, brass-handled, glowing with light from within. The kind of light people basked in when they had nothing to hide. My reflection caught in the glass between them. Dark red lipstick, straightened hair, eyes that no longer searched for approval. For a moment I studied her. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't look like anyone Harold Blake had raised. I wasn't here to knock. I was here to speak. I came back Sunday just like I said I would. But my key didn't fit anymore. The sound it made, that quiet, hopeful scrape of metal meeting resistance, haunts me more than any scream could have. I remember jiggling the doorknob twice, then pulling the key out and checking it like maybe I'd brought the wrong one. As if keys age out of doors. It was late August, one of those dusky Oregon evenings where the sky melts in bruises and gold. I stood there with a single suitcase, still wearing my bus-wrinkled shirt, and shoes that had rubbed blisters through 2 connecting stations. My printed dorm paperwork was curled in my back pocket. I had so much to say about the city, about the audition, about how the violin professor had nodded during my second piece. I imagined them proud. The porch light was off. That should have told me something, but I still knocked. Twice. Then a third time, louder. My knuckles stung. Maybe they were in the kitchen. Maybe the windows were just closed. I rang the bell. Once. Then again, because Diana always said it stuck. Nothing. I waited a full minute before trying the key again. It turned halfway this time, just enough to make me think I'd done something wrong the first time. But it jammed again. A metallic click, final, unyielding. I pressed my forehead to the door and whispered, "Mom." The silence behind that door had a shape to it. Not emptiness, no. This wasn't a home that forgot me. This was a house that had decided. I stepped back and looked around. The street was too quiet, too trimmed. There were fresh lines in the lawn like someone had just mowed. The neighbor's porch light flickered to life across the street, and I spotted Mrs. Greer standing behind her curtains watching. I waved. She didn't wave back. "Dad." My voice cracked as I tried again, louder now. "I'm home." Nothing moved inside. Not a footstep, not a shadow, not a rustle of blinds. Then I saw it. Sitting beside the porch swing was a black duffel bag, the one I'd used for orchestra trips in sophomore year. The one I'd stopped using after Dad said I looked unprofessional carrying it into senior recitals. I'd forgotten it even existed. It was zipped tight and lined up with precision. Resting on top was a clear plastic sleeve. My birth certificate, my social security card, my insurance card. Everything that proved I had once been someone's responsibility. And taped to the handle a single post-it note in Diana's tidy cursive. "You made your choice. Good luck." No name, no love mom, or even a "we're sorry." Just that. I sat down on the steps before I realized I had. My hands were shaking, but not from cold, not even from shock. Something worse, the slow seep of understanding that this wasn't a mistake, that this wasn't a dramatic misunderstanding that would be resolved with a hug and an apology. They meant it. This wasn't a punishment. This was an erasure. I looked back at the front door. There was a hairline crack in the paint I'd never noticed before. A spider web in the corner of the window. Little details that had always been there but never felt important until now. When you grow up in a house, you don't see it like strangers do. But in that moment, I saw it as a stranger would a building pretending to be a home. It hit me then, all at once, they hadn't wanted me to come back. Maybe they'd counted on me failing the audition, or getting cold feet. Maybe they thought New York would chew me up and spit me out, and they wouldn't have to do the dirty work themselves. But when I came back for one weekend, one final meal before orientation, they'd already locked me out. Harold always said choices had consequences. I guess mine had arrived early. I sat there for a long time. The sun sank and the sky turned ink blue. Crickets began their slow, indifferent chorus. My suitcase leaned against my shin like it didn't know what to do either. I checked my phone 3 times, then turned it off. No one was going to call. I should have cried. That's what you do when your life folds in on itself, right? You cry. You scream. You beg. But I didn't do any of those things. I sat there, stiff shoulders back, eyes dry. Because somewhere in my heart, even then, I thought maybe they'd open the door. That maybe Harold would swing it open with that disappointed glare of his and say, "You think you're grown fine. Let's see how long you last." I would have taken that. I would have taken rage, even disgust. But they gave me nothing. No sound. No silhouette through the curtains. Not even the dog barking inside. I realized he wasn't there either. Probably given away already. Just another part of me boxed up and discarded. That night the house stopped being home, and I stopped being their daughter. They didn't just cut me off. They rewrote me. I was curled up on Jenna's couch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled like the lavender detergent her mom used. The apartment wasn't much: 2 rooms, peeling linoleum, and a radiator that wheezed more than it warmed, but it was more than I had. My suitcase sat by the front door like a stray pet no one had named yet. The coffee table was cluttered with empty mugs and junk mail, but all I could focus on was the blue glow of my phone screen. It was a Sunday, a month since I'd stood on that porch and waited for a door that never opened. Jenna had found me at the bus depot 2 days later, looking like hell. She hadn't asked questions. Just let me stay. That's the kind of person she was. The Facebook post had gone up overnight. "Please pray for our family. Nora ran away. We fear she's in danger. Aunt Karen." It was public. Hundreds of likes, hearts, and sad face emojis. Shared 43 times. I tapped it again as if it might change. As if maybe I'd misread it the first 10 times. The comments were worse. "She always seemed troubled. So bright once. Must have gotten involved with the wrong people. We're praying. Let us know if you hear anything." I could still see my own message sitting unread in Aunt Karen's inbox, sent 3 weeks ago when I was desperate enough to ask her for help. "Just a place to sleep," I'd written. "Just until I figure things out." It was marked as seen. She hadn't replied. Neither had anyone else. I'd written a dozen messages to Harold, to Diana. I even tried reaching out to my old drama teacher, Ms. Lewin. We'd spent 3 years building the school's theater program from nothing, writing plays on the weekends, scraping together costumes from thrift stores. She had once called me her secret weapon. Now she wasn't answering either. All I got was silence, and the little gray check marks of apathy. I stared at the post again. It didn't even mention Juilliard. It didn't mention the program. It didn't mention that I came back, that I'd knocked, that I waited. It painted me as unstable, a cautionary tale, a shame. I opened my notes app, scrolled to the bottom where my last entry sat. "Be back. Sunday, can't wait to tell them everything." That was the last thing I'd written before the bus ride home. I'd saved it like a timestamp of hope, the version of me that still believed in reconciliation. But online, it was already overwritten. Harold didn't have a Facebook account. He didn't need one. Karen was his mouthpiece. The message had come straight from him. I could see his fingerprints all over the phrasing. "We fear she's in danger." Not, "We're worried," not, "We don't understand." No. He chose language that erased blame. That made him the concerned father and me, the missing, troubled daughter. And the worst part? Everyone believed him. That same week, I'd tried enrolling at a local community college, just to do something, get back on track. I sat in the registrar's office, hopeful, shaky, with a borrowed laptop on my knees. I filled out the online application, typed in my information, uploaded my high school transcript PDF from my old email. 2 days later, I got the email. "We regret to inform you that your application has been denied due to incomplete academic records." I read it 3 times. Then I clicked the PDF they attached. My final semester at Millstone High was marked as withdrawn. No graduation, no GPA, just blank lines. He had erased that too. I pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to keep the heat from spilling out. I wasn't going to cry. Not again. Not here. I'd done that already on the porch on the bus in Jenna's tiny bathroom with the dripping faucet and the single towel that doubled as a curtain. But this wasn't sadness anymore. Not really. This was something else. Something tight and coiled and rising. They didn't just shut the door. They didn't just leave me out. They made a version of me that they could live with. A broken, reckless, irresponsible girl who vanished in the night. A daughter they couldn't save, not because they didn't try, but because she wouldn't let them. It didn't matter what I had written. He had already decided what everyone else would read. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together. No one came looking, not even once. That was the part that stuck. Not the door slamming shut or the silence that followed, but the fact that no one knocked again. No one posted flyers. No one called hospitals. No, have you seen this girl signs in coffee shops? Just one carefully worded post from Aunt Karen, and the town moved on like I'd never been there to begin with. That made it easier to disappear. The room I rented above the 24-hour diner was barely big enough for the mattress on the floor and the folding chair I stole from the alley. The ceiling was stained from the heat vents below, and the walls smelled like fryer oil no matter how many candles I lit. But the rent was cash, the lock worked, and the guy who ran the register downstairs never asked for my last name. I was Ellie now, Ellie Morgan, according to the job forms I filled out with trembling hands and forged references. It was just close enough to my real name to feel like a joke I was in on. Ellie blinked slowly, smiled softly, kept her head down. Ellie said her family was back east. Ellie said she'd taken a break from school, just figuring life out. Ellie never got flustered, never raised her voice. Ellie didn't write plays or beg for forgiveness or wait by locked doors. She showed up for the night shift at 10:00 p.m., clocked out at 6:30 a.m., and sat on the back steps with a mug of burnt coffee while the sun came up. The cook was a grizzled man named Wren. He never told me his real name either. He smoked menthols behind the dumpster and gave me extra bacon when we were short-staffed. He never asked questions. He once handed me a pair of thermal socks in December and said, "Your bones sound like they're shivering." That was the closest anyone had come to caring. During the day, I used the public library for heat, for Wi-Fi, and for something like a sense of purpose. I'd sit in the corner by the window and scroll through community college course listings under my middle name, Lena. Nora Lena Blake, minus the parts that got me locked out. Eventually, I enrolled in 2 classes, paid in cash, told them I didn't have parents. They didn't press. No one cared so long as the check cleared. I wasn't chasing Juilliard anymore. That dream had too many burned edges. But I took a class in theater history and another in psychology. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to understand what made people like Harold rewrite stories. Maybe because I wanted to know why no one had fought for me. At the diner, I became someone else's, that quiet girl. Customers guessed I was 19, maybe 20. A few tried to flirt, and I learned how to laugh just enough to keep them from getting angry when I didn't flirt back. I learned how to lie. Family, they'd ask. They're back east, I'd say with a shrug. We're not that close. They never asked twice. That winter was brutal. Pipes froze. My heater died in January, and I slept in 3 layers of clothing with a hand warmer tucked under each armpit. On the worst nights, I worked overtime just to stay where it was warm, pretending the clatter of dishes and the sizzle of fryers didn't drive me insane. But in that cracked little space between shifts, when I was sitting on milk crates or wiping down menus, I started to write again. Not full plays, not yet. Just lines, monologues, fragments of dialogue. I wrote them on napkins on the backs of receipts, once even on a takeout bag that I tucked under my pillow. Things I imagined saying if I ever had a stage again. Or a voice. You don't get to undaughter me. Erasure is not the same as escape. You called me selfish for wanting a name. You just hated that it wasn't yours. I didn't know if any of it was good. I didn't care. It was mine. It was something. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving, I was collecting pieces. I didn't know what I'd build with them, but I knew they were mine and mine alone. Every day, I spoke less and listened more. I studied how people moved, how they lied, how they softened their voices when they talked about the past. I watched them edit their lives in real time and wondered how many of them were just walking rewrites like me. At night, when the clock hit 3:00 a.m. and the diner was nearly empty, I'd stare at the buzzing neon open sign and feel not safe, but steady, a kind of balance in invisibility. No one expected anything of Ellie. Ellie didn't break down. Ellie didn't ask questions. But under that silence, something else was forming. Not anger. Not yet. More like the sense that maybe silence was its own kind of weapon. That if I could survive this, I could decide what came next. And no one, no father, no principal, no town full of prayer-posting hypocrites would get to tell the story for me again. Some of us weren't lost. We were erased. The first time I felt seen again was under a spotlight I built myself. It wasn't even a real spotlight. More like a used floor lamp with the shade ripped off, and a too bright bulb I bought from a hardware store in Queens. But it hit my face the same way the sun used to when I'd stand center stage in high school and pretend applause could solve everything. The Black Box Theater could barely seat 30. 11 people showed up that night. 2 were friends of the guy who ran lights. 1 left halfway through because his phone rang and he didn't come back. I didn't care. I stood barefoot on a stage I had painted myself in front of a set made of salvaged furniture and 1 thrift store door. And I told a story. The play was called Inheritance. It wasn't subtle. 1 woman. No costume changes. 90 minutes of broken monologues about a girl written out of her own life. A girl who came back to find that even her shadow had been replaced. A girl who wasn't angry, at least, not at first, but hollow and then sharp, and then something unnameable. I wrote it alone late at night in the Bronx studio I'd moved into after 6 years of surviving as Ellie. I wrote it because the words wouldn't stay inside anymore. They came out in fragments at first, then in floods. I stopped hiding behind fake names and started using my own again. Nora Blake. Every time I typed it, it felt like a dare. When I walked onto that stage, there were no masks left. Just me and the things I never got to say. I didn't cry during the performance, but someone in the 3rd row did. I saw her middle-aged, short gray curls, a scarf looped twice around her neck like armor. She didn't make a sound, but tears ran steady down her face. When the play ended, she sat in her chair for a full minute after the applause stopped. The others filed out quietly, saying the kinds of polite things small audiences say: powerful, unexpected, so brave. I nodded, thanked them, stayed gracious. Then Carolyn approached. She wasn't who I expected. She wore jeans, a battered leather notebook slung under one arm, and she had that soft, guarded tone of someone who's used to being underestimated. That wasn't just good, she said. That was true. I blinked. Thank you. No, she said, shaking her head. Thank you. Would you be open to an interview? I hesitated. I wasn't chasing attention. I hadn't posted the show on Instagram. I hadn't invited friends. I hadn't even told Jenna. This wasn't a comeback. It was a confession. Not for fame, Kara said, reading my pause. Just context. For people who've been rewritten. That word hit me in the chest like a second spotlight. Rewritten. All right, I said. But I get to approve the quotes. She nodded. Always. We met the next week at a coffee shop near Union Square. She ordered black tea and never touched it. I drank my cappuccino, slowly letting the foam cling to the edge of the cup while she asked questions that didn't feel invasive, just careful. We talked about the show, yes, but also the silence that came before it. We talked about stories and who gets to tell them. She asked if the play was autobiographical. I said it's honest, if not literal. She smiled. The article came out in January. What We Leave Behind When We Leave Home by Carolyn. It didn't use my full name. Just Nora, 28, playwright and former student of Millstone High School. The piece didn't speculate. It didn't pity. It just told the story the way I had sparse factual haunted. And somehow, that was enough. It got picked up on Medium, shared on Twitter by an actress with 500,000 followers. A small theater group in Chicago emailed me asking for the script. My inbox, long forgotten, filled with subject lines like, "Thank you, this was me." "Do you have more?" I didn't respond to most of them. Not yet. I wasn't ready. But I kept the emails. I printed the article and tucked it into the same manila envelope that had followed me since Portland. It belonged to another life, but it was still mine. Then, 3 days after the article went live, someone tried to reset my email password. It started with 6 words. "I found something. It's about you." I almost didn't open the message. It was late, nearly 1 a.m., and I'd just come back from a midnight walk that turned into a self-pity loop around my block. The air in Brooklyn still had that wet spring sharpness, like the city was trying to thaw out, but couldn't quite let go of its bitterness. I dropped my keys twice. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket as I was kicking off my boots. I ignored it. Probably spam. Or a late-night meme from someone who didn't know better. But something made me check. Mia Thompson. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade. My cousin. Harold's niece. My mother's favorite +1 at every holiday dinner until the Christmas she stopped coming. I remember asking about her once, and my mom said she's trying to find herself, like it was a disease I should avoid catching. The message wasn't long. "I found something. It's about you. Please call me. It's not junk." No punctuation except that last period. Something about the period made it feel intentional. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over delete. Then I opened the contact info. No profile photo, just a New York area code. She lived here, I called. The phone barely rang once before she picked up. "Nora." Her voice cracked like she'd already said my name out loud 100 times before this call. "I don't... How did you get my number?" "Jenna," she said. "I reached out a few weeks ago. She told me to back off unless I had something real." "Do you..." "Yes," she said, her voice low and breathless. "I found the letter. The real one." I sat down on the floor. Cold tile pressed against the back of my legs. I didn't ask which letter. I already knew. Where? In my dad's attic. In a plastic holiday box full of old wrapping paper and tangled lights. It was inside a Ziploc bag, tucked under a stack of cards from 2013. My heart pounded. "Send it." I already did. "Check your email." I dropped the phone, scrambled to my laptop, opened my inbox. One unread message from an unfamiliar address, subject "You deserve this." Attached a scan. My letter. The one I slipped under Harold's door before I left for Juilliard's summer program. My handwriting slightly smudged. My name signed at the bottom in pink ink. I remembered debating the pen color, wanting to seem hopeful instead of afraid. "Dad, Mom, I love you. I just need a little space. I'll be back Sunday. Don't freak out. Please trust me. Nora." I stared at it for what felt like hours. He'd read it. He knew. They knew. The entire story that followed me as the girl who ran off, the girl who disappeared, the girl too unstable to come home, had been a lie. A lie he constructed not out of confusion or panic, but with intention. And now I had the proof. "I thought you'd want to know," Mia said softly through the speaker. I wasn't sure if I should send it. but when I saw the article, I had to. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask where she had been for 10 years, why it had taken going viral for anyone to remember I was real. Why now, I asked instead. Mia hesitated. Because I believed him, she said. I believed all of it. And I'm sorry. Silence stretched. He told us you'd joined some fringe group, that you cut off contact and didn't want to be found, that you were unstable. He said you'd threatened him. That's not even I stopped myself. What was the point? The lie had done its job. I know that now, she said. I should have known then. What changed? Honestly, your play. And then I saw the look on his face at his retirement party when someone asked about you. He froze. For a second, I saw fear. I leaned my head against the wall. The tile behind me felt like it might crack with the weight of everything I couldn't say. Did anyone else know about the letter? She didn't answer for a beat. Mia. Yes, she said finally. My dad. He's the one who hid it. Said Harold asked him to take care of it. Said it was for the best. My stomach turned. So he kept it all these years? He told me it was probably trash, that you'd moved on, that digging into it would only stir up drama. I laughed. It wasn't pretty. Right. Because truth is just another word for drama. I'm sorry, Nora. Don't apologize, I said. You didn't write the script. You just played your part. It came out harsher than I meant. She didn't respond. We stayed on the line, breathing in sync, but worlds apart. Then finally Mia said, if you want to confront him, I'll stand beside you. I closed my eyes. My fingers hovered over the envelope again, now heavier with a scan that felt radioactive. It wasn't just abandonment. It was erasure. And now I had the proof. The invite said, family welcome. That felt like a dare. It showed up in her inbox at 9:46 a.m. on a Thursday. Subject line, you're invited, retirement celebration, honoring Principal Harold Blake. Subtext, join us as we honor the legacy of 34 years in education. Footer family welcome. Kindly RSVP by May 18th. She stared at it for 5 minutes without touching the mouse. Her coffee had gone lukewarm. She wasn't sure how the organizers had found her email, whether someone still had her name in an old directory, or if Harold himself had offered up the list. That second possibility sent a ripple of dark amusement through her. Did he think she'd ignore it? Or worse, did he think she'd forgotten? The subject line made her hands shake. The phrase, family welcome, made her still. It felt too deliberate, too crafted. Like a net pretending to be a bridge. She clicked the RSVP link. It opened to a simple white form name, email number of guests, dietary preferences. There was a space for special notes. She left it blank. She didn't type Nora Blake. She typed Elaine Hart, her middle name, her mother's maiden name. It wouldn't trigger alerts. It wouldn't get flagged. It would get her in. The RSVP confirmation chimed in. Thank you for confirming. We look forward to seeing you, May 27th, at the Hilton Portland. She closed the tab. Her apartment was still heavy with late afternoon dust and things left unsaid. The windows buzzed faintly with traffic below, but it felt like the world had gone quiet around her, as if time had braced itself for something inevitable. She pulled out her printer, the one she barely used except for tax season, and pressed print twice. One page was the letter. Her letter. The scan Mia had sent of the original note she wrote the summer she left for Juilliard. Dad, Mom, I love you. I just need a little space. I'll be back Sunday. Don't freak out. Please trust me. Nora. The second page was the New York Times article. Kara's voice, her own story. The first public record of what had really happened, or at least what she had been brave enough to let the world see. She didn't read either. She didn't need to. She slipped both into a fresh manila envelope, the same size Harold had once used to return her drama camp audition packet without a single note inside. She still remembered the silence that followed that moment more than the sting. She pulled her carry-on out from under the bed and laid the envelope on top of her blazer, the one Jenna had lent her last year and forgotten to take back. It still smelled faintly of vanilla and old ambition. No dress, no heels, just the blazer, her favorite jeans, and a plain black t-shirt. She wasn't going to look impressive. She was going to look undeniable. Her flight was booked for Friday night. Portland was still gray this time of year, still predictable. She didn't care about the weather. She called Kara. "I'm not asking for permission," Nora said before Kara could even say hello. Kara paused. "I wasn't going to give it. I was going to say, do it. On your terms." Nora smiled. "Always." "You want me to be there?" Kara asked. "No," Nora said. "This isn't for a headline." There was a long breath on the other end of the line, a kind of respect that didn't need to be spoken. "Then I'll wait to hear from you," after Kara said, "however long it takes." Nora hung up and sat back on her couch. For a brief moment, her eyes wandered to the edges of the room, the walls that had witnessed her late-night breakdowns, the kitchen where she'd made cheap tea and cheaper meals, the floorboards worn down from pacing. She'd built a life in the aftermath. But this was about what came before. She looked at the envelope again. It was thin. 2 sheets of paper. A story that had taken 10 years to claw its way out of silence. No speech, no flash drive, just proof. This wasn't about revenge. This was about history. Mine. She sealed the envelope and zipped her bag. He built a career on control. I was going to introduce him to something he couldn't manage: the truth. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, but the door still smelled like burnt toast and dish soap. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A sensory memory that lived in the base of her brain, an association too old to be accurate and too stubborn to fade. But the moment Nora stepped onto the porch, it hit her. The smell of morning routines of comfort long since weaponized. The Blake house looked the same. Maybe the shutters were a little more weather-worn, and the flowers in the front bed weren't as neatly trimmed. But it was still the house, white with green trim. A wind chime on the eaves silent. Porch swing slightly crooked. She stood for a while before ringing the bell. Just stood. From the sidewalk, she must have looked like a delivery person or maybe a late-night neighbor with the wrong address. No one would guess she'd once lived here. Once loved here. The sky was purple with the kind of dusk that feels cinematic. Too perfect for real life. Too quiet for grief. She pressed the bell. No sound came from inside. Her fingers hovered again. Maybe no one would answer. Maybe that was the answer. Then finally, after what felt like a lifetime and half a heartbeat, the door creaked open. Diana Blake looked older, of course. More fragile around the eyes, her cheekbones sharper, her hair now fully gray and swept back in a hasty bun. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't look surprised. She just looked tired. Nora didn't speak. Neither did Diana. They stood there, 2 ghosts in the same timeline, breathing the same air and waiting for someone to flinch. Diana moved aside. Nora stepped in. The hallway hadn't changed. Same scuffed baseboards, same framed diploma from Harold's doctorate on the wall. Same place where Nora once hung her middle school drama trophy before it was taken down without a word. Diana led her into the kitchen. No fanfare, no small talk. There were 2 mugs on the counter, both chipped. One had the words, "Best principal ever," faded across it. She didn't offer tea. Nora sat. Diana leaned against the counter, arms crossed like a teacher awaiting judgment. Nora pulled the envelope from her bag and laid it on the table. The scan of the letter visible through the translucent paper. "You knew I didn't run away." Diana didn't answer. "Did you know he found this?" Nora asked, her voice flat, almost academic. "Yes," Diana said quietly. "How long?" Diana took a breath. "Since the day you left. He showed it to me. Said it was childish. Said it didn't change anything. Nora's chest tightened. And you believed him. I wanted to. That's not the same thing. I was scared, Diana said barely above a whisper. You think I wasn't living with him was like holding your breath in a room full of mirrors. That's not an excuse. I know. Nora clenched her jaw. You let the world believe I was broken, dangerous, gone. I didn't know what else to do. You could have called me. Diana looked down. I didn't know where you were. You didn't ask. Silence settled between them, heavy like fog. Nora studied her mother. The fine lines etched deeper than she remembered the hands that once held hers at school, plays now clenched around a ceramic mug. There was no hate in Nora. Not really. Just an overwhelming sense of absence, of years misplaced. You didn't push me out, Nora said. But you let him lock the door. Diana blinked. I told myself, if you really wanted to come back, you would. Nora stood. That night when I knocked and no one answered, I waited for hours. You saw the light on. You heard the bell. I did. Nora swallowed something jagged. Then why Diana's eyes brimmed with unshed tears. Because I thought if I stayed silent, maybe the worst wouldn't happen. Nora's voice cut sharper now. And what exactly do you think happened to me? Diana didn't answer. Nora picked up the envelope. You didn't betray me with words, she said, voice steady. You did it by saying nothing, and that was enough. He always said he was building a legacy. Funny how legacies crack under the weight of the truth. The second time she walked through the Hilton doors, she didn't hesitate. No coat to clutch, no envelope to hide, no nerves to swallow. Just a calm that bordered on surgical detachment. The kind of stillness one cultivated after years of rehearsing what it meant to be invisible and finally choosing not to be. Nora scanned the lobby marble floors polished to a shine, a live string quartet playing something soft and triumphant in the distance. Someone at the welcome table smiled too brightly and handed her a program before she could refuse it. She didn't correct the name tag that read, Elaine. Inside the ballroom, time seemed to warp. There were banners draped in deep navy and gold celebrating the career of Principal Harold Blake. Spotlights cast a warm glow over clusters of round tables, each decorated with candles and hydrangeas. The stage at the front of the room bore a podium, a screen looping photographs of school plays, science fairs, and graduation ceremonies. He was everywhere, except where it mattered. The legacy wall lined the east side of the room, a collage of framed moments spanning 3 decades. Newspaper clippings, thank you letters from parents, candid snapshots with students. Nora's eyes scanned them like a forensic analyst. Group photo with the 2009 debate team. Class of 2011's valedictorian speech. Ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new auditorium. But no sign of her. There were pictures from the year she starred as Juliet in the school play, but not the cast photo, not the flyer with her name in bold. She stepped closer. Even the 2013 drama club photo was cropped, a seamless lie of omission, as if she'd never existed. The din of conversation surrounded her, former students hugging teachers, school board members laughing into their wine glasses, someone from the local press scribbling in a notebook. She spotted 2 past vice principals near the bar, reminiscing about a snow day in 2010. The man they toasted, the man they came to honor, stood near the stage, surrounded by admiration. Harold Blake wore a tailored suit, hair silvered at the temple's face, creased with performative humility. He laughed easily, shook hands like a politician, and nodded as people recounted stories he had likely told them himself. He wore legacy like a custom-fitted crown. Nora stayed in the back. She didn't need to be close yet. Her moment would come. Her eyes flicked to the program in her hands. The final speech, Harold's farewell, was scheduled for 7:45 p.m. It was 7:38. She glanced toward the side entrance and saw Mia slip in wearing a black dress and a face like stone. They locked eyes for only a second. Mia nodded once, almost imperceptibly. It was enough. The mayor took the stage first, a man in a gray suit who declared Harold a pillar of integrity and a beacon of ethical education. Applause roared. Someone from the school board followed, recounting Harold's moral compass and unshakable devotion to truth. Nora felt her stomach twist, not with nausea, but with rage that had finally outgrown her body. Rage that had calcified into purpose. 7:45. The MC returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce the man we're all here for tonight, Principal Harold Blake. The ballroom filled with standing applause. Harold walked to the stage, smile, modest chin, lifted just enough to betray his pleasure. He stood at the podium, hands steady, prepared to cement his legacy one last time. And that's when Nora stepped forward. No fanfare, no drama, just a woman walking down the aisle in silence with an envelope in one hand and a truth she refused to edit in the other. Eyes turned, whispers followed. Harold faltered. Just for a second. Enough to be seen. The man on the stage wasn't ready to be seen, but I was ready to be heard. He told them I left in anger, that I ran away, that I broke his heart. But he forgot one thing. I wrote it down. The microphone squeaked. Not because she touched it, but because the room was too still. Silence made everything louder. Nora stood center stage, just behind Harold's perfectly polished podium, her fingers wrapped around the envelope like it was made of bone. The letter inside had lived in 3 apartments, 2 notebooks, and 1 fireproof safe, but this was the first time it had ever seen light in front of more than one person. She let her eyes move over the crowd. Faces stared back, some confused, some concerned, some openly skeptical. Rows of suits and sequins blurred together in a sea of shared loyalty. People who had written him thank you notes, who had cried at their children's graduations, who had trusted his handshake. People who had known his version of the truth for 10 years. And people who were about to hear hers. "My name is Nora Blake," she said, voice steady. "I'm his daughter, the one you haven't seen in 10 years. A few audible gasps, a shift in posture. Someone near the bar whispered something that sounded like, "Is she serious?" She held up the envelope. "This is my handwriting. This is dated August 16th, 2013. This is the letter I left on the kitchen counter the night I got into Juilliard's summer program." She pulled the paper out slowly, like a surgeon exposing something fragile and infected. She didn't need a microphone. The silence carried her voice like a current. "I love you. I need space. I'll be back Sunday." Her hands didn't shake. She let the words hang there. She saw some heads tilt. A few people glanced at Harold, who stood frozen near the curtains, jaw clenched, one hand at his chest like he needed to anchor himself. "When I came back," she continued, "my key didn't work. The porch light was off. My suitcase was sitting outside next to a note that said, 'You made your choice. Good luck.'" She scanned the room again. "You were told I ran away, that I was reckless, ungrateful, angry. You were told I broke my father's heart." She folded the letter slowly. "But none of you asked what he broke." Someone coughed. Chairs creaked. And still Harold said nothing. "Do you remember the drama club fundraiser in 2012? She asked, the audience voice warming. "The one where we performed monologues about family." A few older teachers nodded faintly. "I wrote a piece called Inheritance. No one asked me what it meant." "Not then." She turned slightly toward Harold. "You said it wasn't personal, that it was for my own good. But here's the truth. You didn't just lock me out of your house. You locked me out of my own story." He stepped forward finally. The crack in his voice betrayed how hard he was trying to stay composed. "It's not the whole story," he said. "There were complications. You were unstable. You left because I needed space," she interrupted. "And you gave me exile." He opened his mouth again, but it was too late. "You told that story for 10 years. Now it's my turn." The words hung in the air, electric and irreversible. From the side of the stage, Mia stepped forward. She didn't say a word. She just raised her phone toward the ballroom screen. The AV tech looked unsure, but Mia nodded once. The screen lit up. The letter. The original scan creased ink, slightly faded but unmistakable. The slant of the G's. The way Nora dotted her I's with faint pressure. Her name at the bottom. It filled the screen. The room inhaled. Then Mia held up her phone. And on the screen they saw it, the letter in my handwriting. Undeniable. Unforgivable. Truth doesn't whisper forever. Eventually, it cracks the surface. It wasn't the sound of Nora's voice that shifted the room, it was what came after. The stillness that followed. A silence not of respect, but recalibration. The kind of silence people hold when they're trying to remember if they once knew better and chose not to care. The image of the letter still hung on the screen, her handwriting a memory in ink projected 10 feet tall over a man whose whole legacy now teetered on the edge of unraveling. Harold hadn't spoken since Mia raised her phone. He stood near the podium with his hands gripping either side knuckles, white face unreadable. For years, he'd delivered speeches that made people laugh, cry, and stand on their feet. But now he looked like a man who had nothing left to say. Nora didn't need his permission to continue. My acceptance to Juilliard came with one condition, she said. I had to return for my senior year of high school and finish my diploma. I did. But my transcript was never sent. She turned toward the crowd. I didn't know why until a month later when the admissions office told me my file had been marked incomplete. The only person with access to make that change was the principal. Gasps rippled faintly. Someone leaned into their partner and whispered, "He did what he made sure no one could trace it." Nora continued, "Because you can't ask questions about a girl who doesn't graduate. You just assume she didn't belong?" Mia stepped forward again. Her voice was softer but clear. The letter, the one she wrote, was in our attic. In a Ziploc bag. Inside a box labeled Christmas decor. She looked out over the room. That attic belonged to my father, Harold's brother. He didn't hide it in a drawer. He buried it like a crime scene. A hush deeper than silence spread across the audience. Then another voice, sharp but composed, rose from the second row. I remember when they cut the theater program, said a woman in a gray pantsuit rising to her feet. No warning, no discussion, no transition plan. Just gone. She looked at Harold directly. And you said it wasn't a priority anymore. That enrollment was down. Nora turned toward her. Mrs. Blake. The woman nodded. I taught here for 17 years. I never knew what happened to you, Nora. They said you transferred. You weren't the only one they lied to, Nora said. In the crowd, people began shifting uncomfortably. The applause banners, the golden centerpiece at every table, even the catered cake in the corner, it all seemed like remnants from a party thrown for the wrong person. Nora stepped away from the podium, her gaze sweeping across the room. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a rewrite. An intentional, calculated rewrite of my life. From the back, a low voice cut through the tension like a knife. You erased her to protect yourself. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The quietness of it made it louder than any accusation. Dozens of heads turned. Harold didn't. He stared straight ahead. Mouth slightly open, eyes blank. He took one step back from the mic, and for the first time he had no words. A legacy built on silence will always collapse louder than it was ever praised. It began with posture. People who had been leaning forward just moments earlier began to sit back, arms crossed or hands clasped, expressions unreadable but tense. The hum of forced politeness was gone, replaced by the crackling static of discomfort, a room realizing it had applauded something rotten. Harold was still at the front of the ballroom, though he'd shifted slightly behind the podium, no longer the center by choice but by gravity. Every eye was on him, but not with admiration, with study, with doubt. The superintendent, who had earlier introduced Harold with a glowing summary of his unquestioned integrity, stood quietly near the floral arrangements by stage right. He adjusted his tie, then crossed his arms and stepped off the platform. He didn't approach Harold. He didn't approach anyone. Just stood in the shadows watching deliberately uninvolved. A second teacher stood now. Mr. Calhoun. Retired 3 years ago but still recognizable from his signature corduroy blazer and the clipboard he always carried. "You told us she was unstable," he said, voice neither loud nor soft, just devastatingly clear. "You told the staff she'd refused counseling, that she threatened classmates." The weight of that sentence landed like a dropped stone in the center of the room. "I remember asking what happened to her," Calhoun continued. "You said she chose to leave, that her family was relieved." Harold opened his mouth, closed it. His fingers tugged at the collar of his dress shirt, trying to loosen it from a neck that was suddenly drenched in sweat. Mia didn't need to raise her voice. She just held up her phone screen, tilted outward to the nearest group of teachers. One leaned in, then another, and another. "Here's the letter," she said quietly. "You can read it yourself." Someone near the back turned on their phone camera. Another held up theirs, angling it for a better view. The once polished gala had become a slow-burning reckoning. Champagne glasses remained untouched. Plates of hors d'oeuvres sat abandoned. From somewhere to the right, a woman with a press badge moved closer. "Ms. Blake," she asked, "would you be willing to comment?" Nora didn't turn toward her. "This isn't a press event," she said. "This is a correction." The woman nodded, tucked her phone back into her coat pocket. But Nora could feel her scribbling something into memory the way journalists do when they know something seismic has just occurred and they're standing on the fault line. Harold cleared his throat, loudly, as if hoping the noise alone could reclaim the room. "I did what I had to," he said. It was too small a sentence for the moment, too rehearsed, too sterile. Nora didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. "You didn't have to disappear me." The silence that followed was thicker than anything that had come before. Even the chandeliers above, still glittering with warm hotel light, felt out of place, too soft for the truth being delivered below. A murmur rose in the far left corner. Mia showed the letter again. This time, someone filmed it narrating under their breath. "This is the letter her dad hid. For 10 years. There was no applause, no outrage, just stillness. And then the sound of fingers tapping rapidly on phone screens, tweets being sent, texts being forwarded, a ripple of digital movement. One phone screen displayed a hashtag already forming, jogged the letter. The man Harold had spent decades building, pillar of discipline, advocate for student achievement. Beloved mentor, had been reduced in real time to what remained after the applause faded, a man who lied, who erased, who never expected to be found out. And Nora, once the silence he built his story around, was now the one shaping what came next. He used to walk through that school like it was his kingdom. Now he couldn't look anyone in the eye. "The first thing I noticed when I woke up wasn't the sunlight bleeding through the blinds. It was the vibration of my phone, persistent and rhythmic, like a heartbeat outside my body." I reached over, still tangled in yesterday's blazer, and blinked into the screen. Twitter, no X now, was flooded. The letter was trending. My name was in headlines, and Harold Blake's empire was burning. I sat up slowly, my body heavier than usual, as if some piece of me had been ripped loose, and I was still adjusting to the space it left behind. Mia had already made coffee. She sat at my kitchen table, scrolling her phone with an expression somewhere between awe and grim satisfaction. "You broke the internet," she said without looking up. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to survive either," she replied. "But here you are." The New York Times article had been reshared. Local news stations were replaying the clip from the gala, my voice clear. Harold's silence louder. Former students had taken to social media in waves. Not just reposting my story, but adding their own. One from a former theater student he shut us down after Nora left, said drama wasn't practical. We all knew something was off. Another he told me I'd never make it to college. I thought it was just me. And one that made me pause, I was Nora's lab partner junior year. She was quiet but brilliant. I always wondered why she vanished. They hadn't forgotten. They just hadn't known where to look. The school board released a public statement by noon. They were reviewing honorary titles and reevaluating the integrity of past administrative actions, which was bureaucratic for, "We don't want to go down with him." Mia turned her phone toward me. "The Atlantic wants to do a feature. They said they'll fly you out." I exhaled. I don't know if I want to become a story again. You already are. The knock on the door startled us both. Kara stood there holding 2 coffees and a look that said she wasn't just here for the scoop. "You okay?" she asked gently. I nodded, though I didn't mean it. "You knew it would be big." She smiled wryly. "I knew the truth has a way of exploding when it's been buried too long. You just happened to light the match." We sat in silence for a while. Not mourning, not celebrating, just adjusting. I opened my laptop and stared at my inbox. Over 130 unread messages, interview requests, speaking invitations, a publisher asking if I had a book in me. And then one subject line caught me cold. I saw everything. It was from Diana, my mother. For a moment, I couldn't move. My finger hovered over the trackpad, heart thudding like a warning. Not anger, not fear, just the sheer weight of implication. The email sat there silent but heavy, like the house had been when I stood on that porch 10 years ago, suitcase in hand, key useless. I didn't open it. Not yet. I turned back to Mia, whose eyes met mine without needing explanation. He used to walk through that school like it was his kingdom. Now he couldn't look anyone in the eye. And somewhere behind that, between the embers of everything he'd built, a daughter was standing. Not to watch it all fall, but to see what was left standing. Some silences are loudest when they end. The house hadn't changed much. The roses by the mailbox were still overgrown, curling in on themselves like they'd given up asking to be trimmed. The same blue door stood in place, though the paint had chipped more since the last time I stood before it. But I had changed. And I wasn't here to ask for anything. I stood on the porch a full minute before knocking. The wood creaked under my shoes in that way I remembered, soft, reluctant. There were wind chimes on the eaves now. New. Fragile. They tinkled in the soft June air, almost afraid to sing. The door opened without hesitation. Diana Blake didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked like she'd been expecting this moment since the first second the video went live. Her eyes were puffy-rimmed in the kind of quiet grief that doesn't ask for comfort. Her arms stayed at her sides. No offers, no apologies. Just the unmistakable presence of someone who had lived with guilt longer than she'd ever lived with courage. "I made tea," she said quietly. I stepped inside. The living room was spotless, vacuum lines still fresh in the carpet. A tray sat on the coffee table, 2 mugs honey, a tiny plate of lemon slices, like some token gesture of civility, as if this could be civil. We sat. The silence was sharp, but not awkward. I wasn't here for conversation. I wasn't here for repair. I just wanted to hear her say it out loud. She did. "I watched the whole thing," Diana whispered. "I watched you speak. I watched them listen." I didn't respond. She looked down at her tea, then at me. "I believe you, Nora. I believe all of it." I sipped slowly. The tea was too sweet. I didn't know how to leave him. She continued, voice steady but hollow. "I told myself I was protecting you by staying, but you were already gone, and I kept staying anyway. Still, I said nothing. I should have opened the door." "You didn't," I said flatly. "I was scared." "So was I." She nodded, eyes glassing, but she didn't beg. She didn't twist herself into excuses. For that, I was grateful. He told me that you'd made your choice, that you didn't want to come back, that you'd run away. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. I didn't want to believe it, but I needed to believe something. I sat back in the chair. The cushions remembered me, they sank just the same. The framed family photo was still on the mantel, but now it looked incomplete. Or maybe it always had. You were always the brave one, she said softly. I didn't feel brave, I replied. I just refused to disappear. Her shoulders crumpled slightly at that. Not from offense, more like release. Like someone finally confirmed the truth she'd buried in herself for a decade. I looked around once more. The room echoed with ghosts, a birthday balloon still stuck to the ceiling from years ago, a tiny pen mark on the wall where I once measured my height. And somewhere in the wallpaper, I could still feel the weight of unspoken things. We didn't hug. We didn't plan to meet again. Closure isn't always a door being opened, it's sometimes the quiet decision not to knock anymore. I stood brushing imaginary dust from my jeans. She didn't follow me to the door. She just watched, hands folded in her lap, a woman alone, in a silence she helped build. Outside, the air had shifted. The sky was that soft blue between dusk and night, where everything feels like it could either begin or end. I stepped off the porch and didn't look back. But as I reached the gate, a soft electric flicker caught the corner of my eye. The porch light. It sputtered once, then came to life. The porch light flickers behind her for the first time in 10 years. He got to tell the story for 10 years. Now it's mine. The curtain hadn't even gone up yet, but the seats were already full. Not just occupied, attentive. There was an energy in the room, a kind of humming silence, like everyone had collectively agreed not to breathe too loudly. Kara sat on the aisle, notebook in her lap. Mia was beside her, arms crossed not in defiance but pride. She'd flown in just for this. I wouldn't have missed it, she'd said when I asked. This is history. The lights dimmed, and I didn't move. I wasn't backstage peeking through curtains. I wasn't pacing, clutching a script. I was here in row G, seat 12, just another face in the crowd. And that was deliberate, because I had already lived this play. The title glowed across the stage wall echoes. The actors were young, mostly unknown, but sharp. One by one, they stepped into the skin of characters built from the bones of my past. A girl with a too heavy coat, a father who weaponized silence, a house with a porch that watched everything but said nothing. No names were used, not mine, not his, but everyone in the room knew what this was. The show wasn't angry, it was honest, and in that honesty, something more powerful stirred. The final scene landed without theatrics, a simple desk, a folded piece of paper, a girl writing. She wore no costume, no makeup, just a sweatshirt and tired eyes. She slipped the letter into the pocket of her coat, stood, and walked off stage. The lights went out. Silence again, thicker this time. Then applause. Long, sustained, uneven. The kind where people are still processing and clapping at the same time. Not for spectacle, for recognition. As the cast bowed, I let the gratitude swell without letting it drown me. I didn't need to stand. I didn't need the spotlight. I had already claimed something far better. Truth. Afterward, outside the theater, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, horns, laughter, subway rumble. Kara hugged me tightly. You did it, she said. I rewrote it, I corrected. That's all? I checked my phone once we parted ways. Dozens of notifications. Praise, invitations, even a voicemail from a small high school in Michigan asking if I'd be open to talking with their drama students. But the message that made me stop was from someone I didn't expect. A DM from an account named A. Jordan Formath. I was a sophomore at Carter High when you left. I remember how the story went down, and I never believed it. I just didn't know how to ask. But tonight I saw your play. Thank you for being loud. I stared at it for a long time, then typed only 2 words. Me too. The sky above Brooklyn was cloudy, but the city lights made them glow amber. I stood for a while outside the theater watching people drift into cabs back into their own stories. And I thought about what it meant to leave something behind, not because it defeated you, but because it finally set you free. He had taken so much, years, space, words, but not this, not anymore. Inside the stage was bare again, the curtain drawn, but in the echoes of my own words, something new had taken root. He built his legacy on silence. I took it back, word by word.